Welcome to the bazaar. Today we're going to make Pokemon coasters. Today's project's pretty complex, so we're going to have to make sure we follow a plan. First, we're going to cut and assemble our coasters, and then we're going to paint them. And before we can do our resin pour, we have to cut out our Pokemon inserts. And all the while, we also have to design, print, and paint a holder for all of our coasters. Let's get started. When designing the coasters in Lightburn, I didn't do anything fancy. They're simple circles. I took some measurements from a coaster that I have that I like, and I settled on an external diameter of 100 millimeters with an internal diameter of 85 millimeters. And then I just made 4 sets of them. So I haven't really cut 6 millimeter plywood before, so I was kind of just winging it here, and I'll pay for that later. You may have noticed that I didn't cut all the way through on the first pass. That's because I was being stingy and didn't want to waste material on making one of these. These are test cuts that you can make to dial in your laser and know how much power and what speed you should be setting it to cut through your material. They're really great for testing engraving, and you can note what settings you had for future reference. I try to make these as much as I can, but I just didn't want to waste that 6 millimeter cardboard, and this is what I get for it. Well, now that I'm all done though, it's time to finish sanding these guys, clean them up a bit, and then get gluing. So before sanding, I actually used just the X-Acto knife to cut any pieces of plywood that were still attached to the blanks. And then I just used a medium grit sandpaper to remove any splinters or anything like that. I also used a damp rag just to wipe off the soot and any sandpaper dust. And you can see how much was left on the rag, that it really needs to be done. When gluing the coasters together, I just used some basic wood glue and a couple of cheap clamps. Well, the glue's all dry, so I'm going to sand these edges smooth and round over these corners just a little bit so they're not so sharp. Alright, we're all sanded up and ready to go. I'm going to wipe off some of that sawdust, and then it's time to get painting. Alright, it's time for paint. But don't worry, we're not going for the Mona Lisa here. I just got some basic acrylic paints and some cheap foam brushes, and we're just going to do the best that we can. I'm going to paint the backs first so that they can dry facing upwards, and then I'll flip them over and paint the tops. And if you're impatient like me, you can steal your wife's blow dryer to speed up the drying time. You know, every time I paint something by hand, I'm reminded about why spray paint is such a good investment. But you know, Is it really even a craft if your hands don't get covered in blue paint or something else disgusting? Well, after a day of painting and drawing, I'm just not happy with how these are turning out. Um, the paint's a little uneven, and the yellow is definitely not covering the burn marks. So I'm gonna do what I said I didn't want to do, and that is I'm gonna sand these down, and then I'm gonna spray paint them. So I'll be right back after I sand them down, prime them, and paint them again. So, seemingly as punishment for not hand painting the coasters, not once, but twice did I have the clear coat do something called orange peeling to the paint, which just ruins the surface finish. And I had to sand it down and recoat it. And you might be thinking, Jeremy, once I could understand, but twice? You should know better. Well, I can do you one better. I knew before the first time because I've had this happen once before, but I was using different kinds of spray paint that I attributed the issue to. So the first time it happened, I was really confused because I used regular spray paint, not enamel spray paint, and a regular clear coat from Krylon, and it still orange peeled. So not to make the same mistake twice, I went ahead and painted some just cardboard with the same spray paint I used, let it dry, and clear coated it. And after sufficient time, it didn't orange peel. So I figured I must not have let the coasters dry long enough, and that is what caused the orange peeling. Well, I was wrong. I I really don't know what caused the issue. And it was kind of sporadic. It didn't happen everywhere on the coasters, just certain spots. And so when doing some touch-up painting on it, I sprayed some spray paint to a little plastic cup and dipped my brush to cover up the places I had to sand down. And even that right away started to orange peel. And then I realized the spray paint had eaten through the plastic cup. And I can't imagine how it says it's safe for plastic when it literally eats through plastic. So I don't know if it was the paint or if it was the clear coat that did it. But either way, I ended up using a different can of spray paint, clear coat, and no issues there. So I don't know what caused it. If you guys have any ideas, please let me know down in the comments because I'd love to know and get my process down. But now I know for next time.
And now I just wanted to take a quick break from the coasters and from the fun of painting and repainting them. So I decided to work on the holder for the coasters. I am far from a 3D designer or Fusion 360 Pro, so I'm not going to give any real guidance or tips on this. If you'd like to learn more about Fusion 360, I know Bill from Punished Props and Bob from I Like to Make Stuff both have courses on Fusion 360. I haven't done either of those yet. I'm just going off of some YouTube tutorials, but I'm pretty happy with how this came out. 3D printing is another thing that there is a whole rabbit hole you can go down. I just use Cura for my slicer. It works well for me and my printer. And normally I don't mind waiting a long time for a print that's high quality, but I just wasn't willing to wait a whole day of printing. That's too much time for something to go wrong. So I did lower the quality from the highest quality to just a little bit lower. and it did cut down the print time to a still very long but much more manageable 17.5 hours.
Well, 3D printing is not an exact science, and unfortunately we did have a failure. Luckily it was only within the first few hours of the print, but the filament roll got tied up and just couldn't keep going. Luckily for you though, you don't have to wait another 17.5 hours. I got a completed print right here, and it turned out absolutely great. Can't wait to use it. So the idea for the coaster holder was a Pokéball. So I've already done a layer of white, and then I masked off to do a layer of red, and then all I'm going to do is a simple black stripe across the center, and we'll be all set. There's something special about having an idea in your head and then a couple of hours later it existing in your hands. That's one of the magical benefits of 3D printing. I think this came out fantastic. Looks better than I expected, and it's gonna go great with the coasters.
To create the silhouettes to cut out, I just imported the official artwork for the 4 Kanto starter Pokemon, and then use Lightburn's built-in trace feature to get the perimeter. And then I used the measurements of a standard Pokemon card to roughly get the cutouts to fit within the perimeter. And I used the file from the cutting of the coasters to make sure that all of the Pokemon cutouts would actually fit within the coasters. Something that I really wanted to do was try and compare and contrast cutting out the cards using a Cricut versus using my laser cutter. So I just stole the measurements from Lightburn and imported the SVGs into Cricut's design space, and that way we're working with the same cut files and we can just see how the Cricut handles cutting the Pokemon cards. I use a blank sheet of paper just to create an outline for where the cards need to sit on the cut mat. And then I tape the cards in place so they don't fall off. And I do the same thing with the laser. I make sure that I frame the cut and cut out some rectangles where the cards will fit, and that way I can just pop the cards in there and I know that they'll be lined up. Alright, so here we go. On the right hand side, we have the cricket cut cards. The main thing with the cricket is going to be accuracy and trial and error with the pressure and making sure, for me, I didn't want any of the yellow border on the Pokemon, so I would have to really try to be careful when setting up the cut mat, because the cricket is good at making repeatable cuts, but it's not necessarily good at making accurate cuts when it comes to positioning on the actual board. And of course we could have recut these with some more pressure, but if we look closely on those tight turns, you do get some whiting of the cards from the blade turning. But overall, I mean, they look great. They definitely could be used. And then on the left-hand side, we have the laser cut cards. Now, not every laser has a red dot pointer, so using mine, I was able to make sure that we didn't cut any of the yellow, even though we got really close. But there was some very slight charring on the more complicated parts where the laser spent more time, like around Pikachu's tail. But some very light brushing off and with a little bit of a barely damp cloth, I think they came out great. And honestly, the cards look so good, they could be used for something else entirely. I'm gonna go ahead and this time I'm gonna use the laser cut cards.
Alright, so after another couple days of painting and waiting, the coasters are finally at a place that I'm happy with. It's time to set the inlay and get pouring. First, we're going to have to just glue in our cutouts to the center of our coasters, and to do that, I'm just going to use some really basic glue stick. All right, these are looking great, exactly what I imagined. So now we got to pour the resin, but we only get one shot with this. So I went ahead and got everything that we're gonna need already put together. So we got all the different glitters. We got a couple of mixing cups with some popsicle sticks. We have our UV resin and a UV lamp to cure it. And then we also have a propane tank and torch to pop the bubbles. Now this isn't 100% necessary, but it does make a little bit of a better surface on the resin. So as always, use caution and in a well-ventilated area. But let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first step is going to be mixing up some of that UV resin, a separate cup for each color. And I'm going to use just very little glitter because we don't want it to actually make the resin opaque at all. Just give a little shimmer of something that adds a little depth. So I'm going to add some of that UV resin to our cup and then pour in just a little bit of glitter. So I'm going to start with the blue one today. So I'm going to use just that little bit for right now, and if we need to add more later, we will. Mix it up real good. Okay. And now I'm going to pour it on the coaster. You don't need a whole lot, just enough to cover the bottom. That's it. I feel like we need more later. I'm gonna always add a little more. So we got the resin poured in there. It's not cured yet, and you can see it's a little bit of bubbles on the surface and a little wobbliness, but a little torch and that will even itself out. When using a torch to pop resin bubbles, you just need to hit it real quick. You don't want to linger on it at all. All right, looking good. Time to blast it. Whenever using a UV light, it's important to wear the appropriate eye protection, no matter how goofy it looks. Like with everything, you get better at the process the more you do it. So a couple coasters in, I started letting the resin flow to fill in the bottom of the coasters and not having to use the popsicle stick to start around. Something a little bit odd that I noticed is bubbles forming while the UV resin is curing. If you look at the left of the screen, you can actually see one of those bubbles forming right there. To make sure the coasters don't scratch any tables and they slide around a little bit easier, I use my laser cutter to cut out just these little rounds of adhesive-backed cork. I wouldn't use this kind of cork again in the future. The adhesive is really finicky, and it turns out cork is very flammable. That's why it's important to always be near your laser while it's firing. Oh boy, was that a doozy. It took a little longer than expected, had a couple setbacks, but they came out great. I'm super happy with them, and they're a little bit of a belated birthday present for my brother, so happy birthday. And thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had fun and learned something, and I can't wait to see you next time at the bazaar. Even with a couple setbacks with this project, I'm really happy with how they came out. They're very colorful and fun, and I hope you enjoyed learning from my mistakes. Please like and subscribe, and let me know, is this something you would like to see in the bazaar in the future?